Although, while in the midst of it all, it's easy to miss the real impact. We're experiencing what may soon be seen as the greatest political upheaval since at least the collapse of the Soviet Union. What's happening by chapter? The big two are Ukraine and Gaza, but Panama, Greenland, and Canada, New Truth, and the US seemingly having a so far benevolent dictator all compound the situation. And this is leaving aside for separate videos immigration and how Trump's environment policies may accelerate global EV adoption. Ukraine. Trump appears to have two main goals. One, end the war, and two, 500 billion of rare earth minerals to repay the cost of US supporting Ukraine. That Trump wants an economic windfall is echoed in these words quoted by both CNN and the UK's The Independent, as is that Zelensky already put the rare earth minerals on the table as part of his peace plan. Donald Trump's problem with Zelensky's plan could be the exact thing that Zelensky thought was his strength. Those mineral resources overlaying the occupied areas on top of the map where the minerals are highlights the complication. Over half of those mineral resources are in the very areas occupied by Russia. So, for Zelensky to have access, he will need help pushing Russia out, and it will take time and come at a cost. For Trump to get the minerals from Zelensky and Ukraine, Russia must be forced to cede territory it now claims, and that requires a fight and a substantial cost. But what if Trump can say to Russia, if I were to allow you to just have that land, I'd lose $500 billion in rare earth minerals, unless we strike a deal. Remember, everyone agrees over 50% of the 12 trillion is under land you occupy. So you stand to gain at least 6 trillion if we can strike a deal. So, if Trump does a deal and backs Russia, both goals could be achieved. If the US and Russia agree to support that Russia owns its territorial claims, the fighting can stop as no one has the power to argue. There's the complication of blaming Ukraine in order to try and justify exonerating Putin as a war criminal. But Trump has already started blaming Ukraine and Zelensky for starting the war and declaring Zelensky a dictator. If the US can hold that position, then perhaps, at least for now, conflict's settled. US gets richer and saves the expense of supporting Ukraine. Russia gets even richer, and sadly Ukraine loses, but hey, America first doesn't fit with helping Ukraine when that comes at a cost to the US. Then there's Gaza, and Trump's preferred solution faces the problem of getting Egypt and Jordan to accept the Gazans. But both regimes are stuck as they both have internal problems, and without US support, their regimes likely collapse. But if they accept the refugees, that could also lead to collapse. In the end, it could come down, do you want to collapse while being supported by the US or while being undermined by the US? It will take something significant to change Trump's plan when there's real estate at stake. Yes, there are some problems with international law, but international law has a real enforcement problem. Those two alone realign global politics and divide USA and Europe. Combined with the near elimination of US foreign aid and a tariff war, and almost every country on the planet has a changed and less trusted relationship with the US. Voters did want Trump to shake things up, and this is a global geopolitical earthquake. But wait, there's more. Panama wouldn't have even become a country without the US, and the US did take over from France and finish construction back in 1914. Okay, the original canal would not support today's shipping, so it's no longer the original canal the US built. But what about the cost of the US being on standby to defend Panama from being invaded? What about protection money at least? Right now, Panama does seem to be facing some threats from at least one foreign power, even if that sounds like a protection racket. As for Greenland and Canada, hard to see Trump's path to even Greenland. Doubt about Canada. But both will at least remain a negotiation threat. Recall the US borders back in 1824. Borders continue to change, and there's been little expansion since the Pacific and Caribbean expansion that ended in 1945. Trump does intend to shake things up, Plus, with all this global warming, being able to move north might prove very, very attractive, and Trump is particularly keen on real estate. The Trump administration also has control over new truth. For example, banning AAP from White House briefings because they publish the international version of truth. And international reports use the international name Gulf of Mexico in keeping with the International Hydrographic Organization, as used globally, instead of what is deemed to be the new truth within the USA.
But isn't it retaliatory in nature is the argument, because the reason that the AP was barred, which they said was because they're not using the phrase Gulf of America, they're using Gulf of Mexico in line with their standards. And so the question here is this setting a precedent that this White House will retaliate against reporters who don't use the language that you guys believe reporters should use? And how does that align with the First Amendment commitment that you were just talking about?
I was very upfront in my briefing on day one that if we feel that there are lies being pushed by outlets in this room, we are going to hold those lies accountable. And it is a fact that the body of water off the coast of Louisiana is called the Gulf of America. And I'm not sure why news outlets don't want to call it that, but that is what it is. The Secretary of Interior has made that the official designation in the geographical identification name server. And Apple has recognized that, Google has recognized that, pretty much every other outlet in this room has recognized that body of water as the Gulf of America, and it's very important to this administration that we get that right, not just for people here at home, but also for the rest of the world.
Perhaps a trivial case, but the message is you must report what the White House declares is the truth, be it names, crowd sizes, who won past elections or wins a future election, and perhaps even what the Constitution means, or you'll be sanctioned. Or, if Elon Musk has his way, endure a long prison sentence. It seems being a free speech absolutionist doesn't stop him wanting to jail people who say things critical of him. And perhaps therein lies the clue. Rules matter only when you want them to matter. And so far, voters are happy.
You do a lot of focus groups. You really get behind the numbers, the poll numbers, to the sentiments of voters. And it's so interesting. You've been speaking with a number of voters who were Hillary Clinton 2016, Joe Biden 2020, and then went for Trump in 2024. How are these folks seeing the early days of Trump's second term?
Pretty well.
Really?
And they're reacting to it because they love the pace of change. They were very fed up over the last 4 years. They wanted action. They wanted results. They looked at prices. They looked at affordability. They looked at immigration. And they didn't see anything happening. They still don't like what he says, but they like what he does. And these are Democrats now who felt that they were not securing the border. They were doing nothing to prevent illegal immigration, that nothing was actually happening. They wanted to see a reduction in wasteful Washington spending, and they're seeing that. So what they tell me is, I wish you'd be a little bit less rude. But at the same time, they like what he's doing. They believe he's serious about it. And for the first time, they have confidence in the future.
This is despite Trump appearing to ignore the Constitution so far with presidential immunity. Cutting departments that were established and can in theory only be abolished by Congress is okay if it saves money. And ignoring the Constitution on issues like birthright citizenship is okay because the rule was really designed for another time. The risk is, as Trump establishes, that the executive power of the president can control all means of blocking the power of the president, allows for ignoring the separation of powers and acting as a dictator, and means there may be no way to guarantee the dictator feels the need to remain regarded as benevolent by the majority of the population. When the UN was established, a fundamental problem was the assumption that countries would not change. Some countries were placed in special positions, such as permanent members of the Security Council, with right of veto, without identifying what qualified those countries or conditions that must be maintained in order to remain in such positions. As global politics change, just as the League of Nations once became outdated, one day the UN will suffer the same fate.